Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel Strange Night Podcast, Episode 1, The Eternal Sleep of the Three Watts Girls, August 2018. In Frederick, Colorado, life appeared to be smiling upon the Watts family. Chris Watts, an oil field operator, and Shanann Watts, a dynamic social media marketer, along with their two radiant young daughters, Bella, age 4, and Celeste, age 3, lived in a picture-perfect home. Shanann was pregnant with their third child, a baby boy they had already named Nico. The image of the Watts family on social media was a flawless portrait of love and prosperity. But hidden beneath that brightly colored facade of happiness was a deep, gaping fracture. A secret Chris Watts was desperately trying to bury. On that fateful weekend, Shanann returned home from a business trip. Her final encounter with her husband took place in an atmosphere of tension and coldness. Chris had grown tired of Shanann. He was infatuated with a new colleague, someone who offered him the sense of freedom and novelty he craved. He desired a new life, free from the burden of family responsibility. That night, while Shanann and the two girls were sound asleep, the evil within Chris surfaced. He chose not to pursue divorce, not to seek a custody agreement, but to take the most horrific path: destruction. In the early hours of August 13th, Chris Watts murdered Shanann in their bedroom. The act of strangling Shanann, his pregnant wife carrying his son, transformed him into a monster. Yet the horror did not stop there. After killing his wife, he should have stopped, but the two daughters, Bella and Celeste, woke up and either witnessed part of the tragedy or sensed the profound abnormality. The most chilling detail is what happened next. Chris Watts drove Shanann's body and his two daughters, who were still alive, to his remote worksite, an area filled with crude oil storage tanks. In that desolate location, he ended the lives of Bella and Celeste. This detail was later confirmed by Chris himself. He pushed the two little girls, his small angels, down into the oil tanks. Imagine the terror and the desperate struggle of Bella, the 4-year-old who tried to resist, who begged her father for mercy. Bella was the last one to endure her father's ultimate brutality. After committing the crime, Chris Watts returned home and began the worst performance of deception imaginable. He called the police, reporting his wife and daughters missing. With a pained expression, he appeared on television, pleading with the public for help finding his family. The image of a broken father, overwhelmed with worry, successfully deceived the entire nation. He stated, "I just want them to come back. I miss their smiles." However, the deceit could not last. Contradictory statements, particularly what he said about Shanann's business trip and his wedding ring being removed, raised the suspicion of investigators. When confronted with evidence, especially after his mistress confessed to their affair, Chris Watts' wall of lies crumbled. He led the police to the burial site of Shanann and the disposal sites of the girls. The Watts case is a gruesome tragedy of profound selfishness and betrayal, not only against the marriage vows, but against the very instinct of fatherhood. It exposes a terrifying truth: evil can reside within an ordinary person, and a warm smile can conceal an ice-cold, malicious heart. Chris Watts' crime was not just murder. It was the complete annihilation of a family driven by his desire for a new life. He was sentenced to life in prison, but the emptiness and the pain he left behind remain a scar that will never heal in the memory of America. Episode 2, The Lisk Tragedy. Blood on the family dinner. This story takes us to a seemingly tranquil town in Germany, the home of the Lisk family. In 2009, the case of Peter Lisk became a chilling symbol of the collapse of familial relationships. This was not a case motivated by greed or infidelity, but by the relentless accumulation of unresolved conflicts, a desire for control, and the ultimate explosion of uncontrolled rage. Peter Lisk, the husband and father, presented the facade of a stern, respectable man. Yet internally, he was an autocrat, constantly seeking to control the lives of his wife, son, and daughter-in-law. Tensions had been simmering for years, particularly between Peter and his son, who had married and established a separate life. The arguments grew more frequent and intense, revolving around trivial matters that, in reality, represented Peter's fear of losing control. On the night of the tragedy, the Lisk family gathered for a seemingly cozy evening get-together. Initially, everything appeared normal, but beneath the warm exterior, the tension was nearing a breaking point. A small argument erupted, but this time it did not stop at mere words. Peter Lisk's anger reached its terrible zenith. In a fit of madness, he retrieved a weapon, a handgun, and turned his home into a bloodbath. Peter's first target was his own son. He shot his son in a moment of utter fury. This brutal act shattered every boundary of the father-son bond. Next, Peter turned on his wife. The woman who had built a home with him now became the next victim of his insanity. Finally, he murdered his daughter-in-law. In total, 3 members of the Lisk family fell to the hand of the husband, the father, and the grandfather. The horrifying aspect was the coldness and cruelty that followed. Peter Lisk called the police himself and calmly confessed to his crime. When investigators arrived, they discovered a terrifying scene. A family gathering drenched in blood. An inexplicable tragedy in a family that outwardly seemed to have no major problems. The Lisk case is more than a simple mass murder. It is a cautionary tale about the destructive power of suppressed emotions and control within family dynamics. In a society where respect and hierarchy are sometimes prioritized, the unresolved pressures and conflicts transformed a man into a killer of his own dearest relatives. It stands as proof that family dinners can conceal the darkest, deadliest domestic tragedies. Peter Lisk, who ended the lives of 3 of his family members, ultimately faced justice. However, the wound this crime inflicted on the community and the doubt it cast upon the very nature of family love remain forever. It is a chilling scream from the quiet heart of Germany, reminding us of the dormant demons within the human psyche. Episode 3. The Curse of the Perfect Wife. The Scott Peterson Tragedy. This story takes place in Modesto, California in 2002, and it redefined the concept of ultimate betrayal. Scott and Lacey Peterson were the couple everyone aspired to be. Lacey was beautiful, radiant, and 8.5 months pregnant with their first child, a boy they planned to name Connor. Scott was a young entrepreneur, handsome and seemingly trustworthy. Their lives appeared to be a modern fairy tale. But that fairy tale ended on the fateful Christmas Eve of 2002. Lacey Peterson was reported missing. Scott Peterson was the first to report it and appeared utterly distraught and worried. He told the police he had gone fishing on the San Francisco Bay, and when he returned, his wife was gone. Scott's distress, combined with Lacey's pregnancy, drew nationwide attention to the case. The searches, Scott's tearful pleas on television, all were closely followed by the public. However, as the investigation delved deeper, cracks began to appear in Scott's perfect facade. He started behaving erratically, buying a new truck and selling his fishing boat. The most suspicious finding was his clandestine phone calls and inconsistent statements. Police quickly discovered that Scott was having an extramarital affair with a woman named Amber Fry, to whom he had lied, claiming his wife was already dead. This is when the brutal truth began to unfold. Scott Peterson was not worried about his wife and son. He was planning his escape from them. Lacey, the perfect wife, was now just an obstacle to the new, free life Scott craved. He wanted to eliminate her and their unborn child, to be with his mistress unencumbered. In April 2003, 4 months after Lacey disappeared, her body and the remains of the fetus, Connor, were found washed ashore on the San Francisco Bay, near where Scott claimed he had gone fishing. This evidence immediately turned Scott from a grieving husband into the prime suspect. Prosecutors argued that Scott had murdered Lacey at home, then used his boat to dispose of her body in the bay. The cold-blooded calculation of Scott Peterson is what makes this case so horrifying. He lived a double life, pretending to love his wife and child while planning their demise. He didn't just kill his wife, he extinguished the life of his own son. The testimony of Amber Fry, who secretly recorded her conversations with Scott at the request of the police, became the ironclad evidence that exposed his deception. The Scott Peterson case is not just a tragedy of crime, but a horror story of duplicity. It teaches us that the most dangerous killer might be the person sleeping next to us, the one we trust implicitly. Lacey Peterson's curse was not her death, but the reality that she was destroyed by the one she loved and trusted the most. Scott Peterson was sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment, but his name will forever be synonymous with one of the most ruthless domestic crimes in American history. Episode 4, Friendship Turned Foe, the ironclad case between two young women. This horrific story takes place in Ontario, Canada, and our central figure is Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Her case is particularly chilling because of where her crimes were committed. Long-term care facilities, places that are supposed to be safe and compassionate havens. Elizabeth Wetlaufer was a registered nurse, outwardly ordinary, but internally, she was a secret, calculated serial killer. For years, Wetlaufer silently dispensed death by injecting lethal doses of insulin into the elderly and frail patients under her care. She felt an irresistible compulsion to end their lives, effectively appointing herself an angel of destruction. She murdered at least 8 people and attempted to murder 6 others. This was a true nightmare within the healthcare system. However, the core focus of this episode is not just the serial killings, but the devastating collapse of a personal relationship when the crime was exposed. Elizabeth Wetlaufer confided her murders to a close friend. Initially, it may have been a confession during a mental crisis, a desperate search for empathy, or a plea for relief from the burden of guilt. She shared her darkest secrets with this friend, believing their bond was an unbreakable fortress. But the friend could not bear the horrific truth. Their conscience was tormented, and they realized that silence would make them an accomplice. When the friend began to express intentions to report or confront Wetlaufer about her crimes, the killer reacted with vicious cruelty. Elizabeth Wetlaufer, now cornered, attempted to silence her confidant. She tried to threaten, manipulate, and even planned to eliminate the friend, turning their bond into a deadly life-or-death struggle. Her serial killing had evolved into a personal vendetta, murdering her friend for the betrayal of revealing her secrets. Fortunately, the friend was brave enough to step forward and provide crucial information to the police. Wetlaufer's story is a chilling example of betrayal in friendship and the danger of absolute trust. It exposes a terrifying reality. Abusers and killers can be anyone, even the friend with whom we share our most intimate thoughts, or the person entrusted with the care of our most vulnerable loved ones. The case concluded with Elizabeth Wetlaufer's arrest and life sentence, but it leaves behind a haunting question. Do you truly know the darkest secrets of your best friend? Episode 5. The Son Becomes the Destroyer. The French Family Tragedy. This story takes us to France, where respect and family tradition sometimes become invisible chains. The case of patricide and matricide is always among the most haunting tragedies, and the case of this particular family is especially heartbreaking. It stemmed from prolonged emotional deadlocks and suffocation. Our protagonist is an adult son who still lived under the immense shadow of his parents' control. His parents, people of a certain social standing, maintained impossibly high expectations and controlled every aspect of their son's life, from his career and love life to his small, personal decisions. Even as an adult, the son felt suffocated, stripped of his freedom, and unable to live his own life. This smothering control had accumulated into a deep, smoldering hatred, a rage that had hardened over time. The tension reached its breaking point during an argument. It was not just a typical dispute. It was the explosion of all the emotions that had been suppressed for years. In a moment of madness, the son decided that the only way to free himself was to erase the source of his confinement. He brutally murdered both his father and his mother. This was not a quick killing. It was an outburst of extreme violence, reflecting the level of desperation and anger he had endured. The house, which was supposed to be a home, became the scene of a horrific massacre, stained with the blood of the people who had given him life. After committing the crime, he attempted to stage the scene, making it look like a typical robbery homicide. However, his erratic behavior, his noticeable lack of grief, and inconsistencies in his testimony quickly raised suspicion among the police. Under intense questioning, the story of family suffocation, mental fatigue, and the desperate yearning for freedom gradually unfolded. This case is a terrifying cautionary tale about family pressure and how love can be twisted into tyranny. It illustrates that sometimes the destroyer comes not from the outside, but from within. Excessive control and unrealistic expectations can break a person's spirit, turning them from a child into an enemy. The son ultimately faced the horrific consequences of his actions. This case shocked France, forcing people to question the boundaries between parental love and control in family relationships. It is a horror story of self-destruction where freedom was purchased with the very blood of his parents. Episode 6. The Broken Vow. The Mysterious Deaths of the Bain Family. This story transports us to Dunedin, New Zealand in 1994, the scene of one of the most controversial and haunting murder cases in the country's history. All 5 members of the Bain family, the father, Robin, the mother, Margaret, and 3 of their children, Arawa, Laniette, and Stephen, were brutally murdered in their home. When David Bain, the only surviving son, returned home, he frantically called the police, reporting the horrific sight he discovered. The crime scene was a nightmare. 4 family members had been shot with a rifle. The killer not only murdered them, but also performed bizarre acts. The case immediately centered on 2 main suspects, the father, Robin Bain, and the son, David Bain. The prosecution argued that David, then 22, committed the murders to escape his father's control and due to family conflict. They pointed out that David was the only survivor and the only one with the motive and opportunity to commit the crime, especially after providing contradictory accounts of what had transpired. David was convicted and served time in prison. However, the story did not end there. The defense team and a significant portion of the public vehemently believed that the father, Robin Bain, was the culprit. Robin, a school principal, was reported to have mental health issues and was believed to have suffered a breakdown. This theory suggested that Robin murdered his wife and children and then committed suicide by staging the scene. Suspicion intensified when evidence concerning a suicide note allegedly written by Robin was introduced. For years, this case has deeply divided New Zealand. David Bain was acquitted in a retrial in 2009 after a long campaign by his supporters. This development highlighted flaws in the original evidence and the ambiguous nature of the case. What makes the Bain family massacre so chilling is not the brutality of the crime itself, but the lingering uncertainty about who committed it. The truth remains buried in the shadows. Was David a ruthless, cunning killer who deceived the entire justice system? Or was Robin a crazed father who destroyed his family and successfully framed his son? This is a psychological horror story about the blindness of justice and the devastation of family secrets. Although David Bain was ultimately found not guilty, the reality of the broken vow, the vow to protect one's family, remains a haunting nightmare with no clear resolution. Episode 7. Sibling Envy. The Tragedy of Two Wealthy Brothers. This story takes place in an affluent area of the United Kingdom, focusing on two brothers who jointly inherited a massive fortune and a valuable business enterprise. From the outside, they were the epitome of successful heirs, but internally, their relationship had long been corroded by relentless jealousy and insatiable greed. The elder brother felt perpetually wronged, believing the assets were unfairly divided, or that his efforts were overshadowed and exploited by his younger brother. This bitterness grew into a cold, calculated hatred. He began to view his sibling not as family, but as the largest obstacle blocking his path to the sole possession of the entire estate and power. The murder plot was meticulously planned, befitting the style of a wealthy businessman. The brother chose not to use crude violence, but an assassination staged to look like the perfect accident. He researched thoroughly, calculating the precise time and location. Perhaps a staged car crash, a convenient fall from a height, or a discreetly sabotaged boat trip. On the night of the tragedy, the younger brother died. The incident was initially concluded by the police to be a tragic accident. The elder brother played the role of the grieving survivor, taking over the company's operations and formalizing the inheritance of the entire estate. He successfully concealed the truth, seemingly achieving everything he desired. However, the truth always finds a way to reveal itself. Small details, such as a suspicious financial transaction just before the younger brother's death, or the palpable lack of genuine sorrow in the elder brother's eyes, raised flags for investigators. One persistent detective began to connect the pieces of evidence, focusing on the only motive potentially greater than familial love: greed. The subsequent investigation exposed the entire sinister plot. The brother had either hired someone or carried out the act himself, but every step to cover his tracks had been planned in advance. The stark reality was that he had violated the vow of blood, murdering his own brother to satisfy his thirst for money and power. This case shocked the United Kingdom because it exposed the dark underbelly of the upper class, where wealth does not guarantee happiness or morality. It stands as a terrifying testament to the destructive extent of human greed, capable of turning a brother into a cold-blooded murderer, willing to destroy his family for the sake of an empire of assets. This story is a chilling reminder that, in the wealthiest families, envy can be the deadliest poison. Episode 8. The Night Hunter, the London Sociopath. London, an ancient and bustling city, sometimes provides the perfect hiding place for predators. This story does not focus on domestic tragedy or property disputes, but on the crimes of a sociopathic serial killer who turned dark alleys and deserted areas into his hunting grounds. He was nicknamed the Night Hunter by the media. He was a personality disorder case, killing not for financial or emotional reasons, but for the perverse satisfaction of taking and controlling the lives of others. His victims were often the vulnerable and marginalized, attacked in the late hours when the city was asleep. The horror of the case lay in the randomness and brutality of the attacks. He left few clear traces and no logical link between the victims, except that they were chosen at random. This left the police baffled for a long time, and fear spread throughout the city. Londoners lived in suspicion, afraid to go out at night, fearing that any shadow might conceal the Night Hunter. He was a meticulous individual. He often left small signatures, bizarre messages, or chillingly arranged the victims' bodies to challenge the police and assert his power. This was a game the sociopath believed he was always winning. During the investigation, criminal psychologists profiled him, a lonely, intelligent individual with an incredible ability to hide his emotions. He could have been anyone: the friendly neighbor, the quiet colleague, or a stranger passing by on the street. It was his terrifying normalcy that shielded him from suspicion for so long. Eventually, the police had to rely on a small mistake, a faint DNA sample, or the testimony of a narrowly surviving witness to track him down. The apprehension of this sociopath was a tense event, bringing an end to the city's reign of terror. The case of the Night Hunter is a horror story about the pure presence of evil in a civilized society. It is a grim reminder that in the modern capitalist world, where every individual is concealed by work and private life, there always exist sociopaths who exploit urban anonymity to carry out the most brutal acts. The fear he sowed became a dark chapter in London's history. Episode 9. The Lonely House. The daughter who killed her parents for insurance money. This story unfolds in a quiet American suburb where a seemingly ordinary facade concealed a devastating tragedy rooted in material greed. The main character is a daughter who should have been a source of comfort and support for her parents, but instead became the coldest of murderers. The daughter, despite being an adult, lived perpetually in financial distress and debt. Meanwhile, her parents owned a comfortable home and, more importantly, held substantial life insurance policies. In the daughter's mind, a dark idea began to take shape. Her parents' death would solve all her financial problems. This was a crime planned with calculated, merciless precision. The daughter did not commit the act herself, but hired others, often a lover or an associate, to carry out the murders. The plan was to stage a botched robbery homicide, a scenario of random crime that the police would easily accept. On the night of the tragedy, the quiet house suddenly became a crime scene. Her parents were brutally murdered. Everything was arranged to look like a forced entry and struggle. The daughter appeared distraught, called the police, and wept over the sudden loss of her mother and father. However, the facade could not hide the truth for long. The daughter showed no signs of genuine grief. Instead, she displayed an overly eager interest in resolving paperwork, especially the life insurance policies and the inheritance. Her coldness and inappropriate behavior immediately drew the attention of seasoned investigators. The police quickly discovered discrepancies in her statements, as well as evidence linking her to the person hired to commit the crime. Through phone records, text messages, and financial evidence, the daughter's web of deceit was meticulously exposed. This case is a chilling narrative about the perversion of familial love. It demonstrates how the lure of money to a certain degree can paralyze all emotion, turning a child into a destroyer. The daughter appraised the lives of her parents with the figures printed on the insurance contracts. The house, which should have been a sanctuary of love, now forever carries the memory of betrayal and cold death. This daughter's crime is a terrifying example of how evil can hide within the most intimate relationships, where absolute trust is given, only to be exploited with devastating cruelty. She faced justice, but this story will forever be a reminder of the domestic tragedies driven by selfishness and greed. Episode 10, The Friend's Bite. The Sleeping Beauty Case. This final episode takes us to Canada, where a close friendship was twisted into a gruesome tragedy by hidden envy. This is the story of two friends who grew up together, sharing all their secrets and dreams. Yet one of them harbored a deep, silent resentment. The victim was a beautiful young woman, successful and widely admired. The perpetrator was her best friend, who witnessed all of the victim's successes and happiness. For the killer, every joy of her friend was a dagger plunged into her own low self-esteem and jealousy. This envy grew, morphing into an obsession to eliminate her friend, to seize her position, her attention, or simply to end the torment in her own mind. The crime was committed in the coldest and most unexpected way, which is why the case became known as the Sleeping Beauty murder. The killer chose a moment when the victim was completely vulnerable, while she was sound asleep in her own home. The act of murder took place in silence. No screams, no resistance. Her enemy was not a stranger, but the person who could easily access her in her sleep. The horror lies in the betrayal of absolute trust. The friend exploited the intimacy and trust to gain access and carry out the brutal act. After committing the crime, the killer attempted to meticulously stage the scene, perhaps suggesting a break-in or an unknown accident, aiming to divert the police away from the closest relationship. However, like all crimes driven by emotion, the deceit had its flaws. Police began to suspect the best friend when they detected unusual behavior and inconsistencies in her testimony. The lack of genuine emotion, the over-attention to minor details, and small contradictions in her timeline painted a picture of a hidden killer. Through deeper investigation, the underlying envy and accumulated hatred were exposed. The killer revealed past signs of jealousy, subtle remarks about her dissatisfaction with her own life compared to the victim's success. This case serves as a haunting conclusion to our series, emphasizing that destruction comes not only from strangers or major family conflicts, but also from the deep-seated resentment and envy harbored within a friendship. It is a psychological horror story, illustrating that the most dangerous foe might be the person to whom you carelessly open your heart and your home. The killer was eventually caught and faced justice, but the Sleeping Beauty case remains a chilling reminder of the deadly cost of envy in human relationships.